Hi friends, it's Lisa Hetrick, illustrator for Gina K Designs, and I'm popping in today with this really fun tutorial. I'm going to show you how I created this card and all of the elements on this easel card using a watercolor resist technique, and I'm going to give it a new spin and a twist with some really super bright colors. I'm also going to show you how I use this easel from my local craft store and my UR stamp set to create this watercolor resist easel card. This project is a lot of fun, and I'm going to show you how to use the digital die cuts that I've created that are free to you, and they're a companion to the UR set, and they're available on my website, on my blog, and I'll make sure I'll link that up into the notes down below. So we're going to start with a 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 piece of black cardstock. This cardstock is the black cardstock from Gina K Designs. I absolutely love this black. It is a deep, deep, rich cardstock, and it's pretty awesome to work with. I'm also going to be using this 4 by 4 piece of watercolor paper, and you can really use any kind of watercolor paper for this project. Thing that we're going to do for this tutorial is to use the wreath image from the UR stamp set and ink it up with Versamark and heat emboss it so that we can create the resist background. Again, I'm using the Versamark ink pad and the Gina K Designs embossing powder in the fine detail white. So I'm going to go ahead here and ink it up. And one thing I want to note about the wreath image is that you can really turn it in any direction that you want to. You can do a whole 360-degree turn with the wreath image, and you'll get a different effect each time. And the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and heat emboss the wreath image, and it is pretty. So now is the juicy part. We're going to move on to creating a background. And I'm using the Distress Oxide Antique Linen for this because I wanted to create a very neutral, light background. I'm going to be using a lot of color on top of this resist, so creating a neutral background first is going to be very helpful and allow me to add some of those water-based markers and watercolor markers on top. So I'm going to go ahead and spritz up the antique linen and just mash my paper and spin my paper around in the Distress Oxide inks, and you can start to see that the wreath image is starting to reveal itself. And I really think that the neutral background is awesome, but I wanted to add a little bit of green around the edges to kind of shape it up a little bit. So I went ahead and added a little water, kind of dipped the paper in, and again, just kind of get messy and see where it was going to take me. Adding more water on top of the Distress Oxides kind of helps them blend and gives you a really nice effect. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up my mess here and then get my heat tool out and just kind of heat this up a little bit so that I can dry it and take away some of the color along the way and move on. So now that my paper is dry and this color looks really amazing, and I love the yellow tints that have come out from using the Distress Oxide inks, I'm going to move ahead and pull 3 of my favorite Gina K Designs dye inks, the Passionate Pink, the Cherry Red, and the Turquoise Sea Ink Cube. I'm going to use these vibrant colors with the bits and pieces in the stamp set that accompany the wreath to create a little bit more dimension and a little bit more volume around the wreath. It's also going to create a lot more color. So I've sped up the video a little bit, showing you the different pieces that I've pulled from the stamp set and how I use them, just kind of going around in a circle and changing up the colors along the way. Now it's time to have some fun adding the sentiment to the inside. And I am going to go ahead and do the "You Are Loved" in the inside of the wreath image. And with a little bit of a twist, we're going to use the Gina K Designs Fine Detail Embossing Powder for this technique. But I am going to use the silver because I'm using so much color and I'm going to be using black cardstock. The silver in the sentiment's really going to give it a little bit of different dimension. So I went ahead and inked up the U stamp with some Versamark and stamped it down onto the watercolor paper, getting it nice and coated so that I can get a really nice impression with the stamp. It's kind of hard sometimes to use Versamark on watercolor paper because watercolor paper is so porous. So you really do need to add a little bit extra Versamark onto the stamp in order for the embossing powder to really adhere and stick and get a decent embossed image. The next step was to fire up the heat tool and go ahead and heat emboss the U stamp. And I really, really love the effects that I got from the detail embossing powder. It's very super, super duper shimmery, and I really, really think that it helps make the design. So I went ahead and repeated the process using the rest of the sentiment and really got in there and nested that sentiment up in between the O and the U and wrapping it around the bottom of the Y. And again, the silver embossing powder really, really made this super shimmery and shiny and kind of offset the whole project. Okay, so now that the heat embossing is done and the stamping is done and the resist technique is kind of complete, it's time to get some of that juicy, juicy color in there. So I'm going to be using the Zig Clean color brushes in some various colors, and I'm probably going to use this Tombow to add a little bit of color around the wreath image, and this water brush is really going to kind of spread it out and make it a little bit messy. But the first thing that I'm going to do is go around the wreath image and add a little bit of color inside the actual leaf images all around the wreath. And I'm not really that concerned about being inside the lines because I'm taking the water brush and I'm blending it out, and I'm getting prepped and ready for adding more color and a bigger splash that I'm going to be spreading out and getting this color to really kind of blend together. So take a look. Really love how vibrant the colors are and how everything turned out in the wreath. So I'm super excited to move on to the digital die cut images that are really going to help pull this whole easel card together. I've got two Distress Oxide inks here, and I'm going to create a pool of color so that I can dye the two hearts and the flower image. I'm going to use the wreath images and I'm going to be stamping on them and coloring them. So this is just going to be used for the two hearts and the flowers. So moving on to the wreath images, the digital die cuts have been created so that they fit the stamp image perfectly. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of line it up, and because it's a clear stamp, you know that we can see right through it. I'm going to line it up and just kind of get my bearings before I move on and ink the stamp and do it for both of the wreath images. I'm going to be using the Gina K Designs black ink because I really want to get that contrast with the black cardstock that we're going to be using in the end. And I'm going to use the clean color brush to color in the images. So let's go ahead and watch the process. Now with the stamping complete, it's time to add some color. So I'm going to use a little bit of a hybrid color technique because I want to match up the color that I used in the original stamped piece, which was the turquoise sea ink cube from Gina K Designs. And I'm going to use this clean color real brush in the light blue. And I'm going to dip it into the dye ink. So I'm mashing down the dye ink on my craft mat, dipping it in, and I'm going to be applying the color to different leaves within the digital die cut stamped image. And the reason why I'm dipping it in and kind of using these two colors is because I wanted to intensify the color and give it a little bit of a different look. Now I went ahead and moved on to the heart images and used the black onyx ink from Gina K Designs and lined up my heart stamp and went ahead and stamped the images on the digital die cuts that I had already prepared using the Distress Oxide ink colors. So moving on to the flower image, I'm going to do a little something different with this one. Instead of using the black onyx ink and stamping it down, because it is a solid stamp and it would really just make the whole image black, I'm going to use two water-based markers. I'm going to use the Tombow brush pen marker to color onto the stamp, and then I'm going to add a little bit more of a deeper pink detail using the Zig Clear brush pen in the center. And then I went ahead and going to stamp that right into the digital die cut area. I'm going to mist it up with a little bit of water first just to kind of activate the color, and then stamped it right down into the space. So now that all the die cut images are colored and stamped and ready to go, it's time to assemble the card. So I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video a little bit so you can kind of see me put the piece together and how I kind of moved all the elements around here and there and everywhere until I created something that I felt was appealing and pleasing to the eye. So here's the final card design, and I really think it turned out really well. I love how the elements are down in the lower right hand corner to balance out the sequins in the upper left. I added it to the easel, and here's the final product. I hope you really enjoyed today's tutorial. Thanks for watching.